hosts today. This morning we're lucky enough to have Julio Vasquez from SDI with us. He's going to talk about the value of XML and DITA and the reasons not to wait. I'd like to take this opportunity, hello computer, next page. Oh, I'm on the end page, that's why. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind everyone about all of the resources available to the Arbortext community. As many of you know, ours is a large and very active community. I've got a chart here from the list maintained by single sourcing. The URL for that page is at the bottom. This is near a complete a list as we've got. They're all free resources and most are online. Real quick, going down and then across, there are two mailing lists. Adapters has been around since 1997. Arbortext R&D and project management monitors and answers questions on the list. 3B2 users is at Yahoo Groups, and it's focused on the advanced print publisher formerly known as 3B2. The Adapters Code Archive has a repository of customization codes, snippets, and other useful bits. The forums at PTC, they have more visibility than Adapters, and a lot of folks are starting to monitor and answer questions there, but it's in its infancy. The exception here is for ISODraw. There's no better place to get your questions answered than at the forums of PTC. PTC user runs technical committees for the PTC products. PTC encourages all customers to join and help guide product development and the direction of the product line. In the next column, there's a page that keeps the top 4 or 5 Arbortext resources. There's also Arbortext boot camps coming. These are new. And we've seen a lot of Arbortext job postings the last several months, and as far as we can tell, no one who has Arbortext skills under their belt is currently out of work. At DITAXML.org, there's an announcement blog for this user group, also some small things of interest for the Arbortext DITA community. The Squidoo lens is all things Arbortext in one place. That's kind of what Squidoo is all about. Next column, the Arbortext user group is us here today. There's a PTC user world event coming in June. There are Facebook groups for Arbortext user group and for 3B2, a LinkedIn group. There are videos on YouTube. There's a Arbortext Community Voices podcast series. You can search for Arbortext on iTunes or go to podcast.singlesourcing.com. There's a blog for Arbortext Voices run by Single Sourcing, which is also available on the Kindle. And there's a Twitter list of all people Arbortext on Twitter at Listorius. Once again, this list is pretty much well maintained at the URL on the bottom of the screen. Real quick, here's some upcoming events. Our April 24th is our next meeting. Topic and speaker should be out next week. There's the Content Management Strategies Conference in Santa Clara. We're lucky to be here in the Bay this year, and that's in April. The first Arbortext Boot Camp is in San Jose, May 15th. And the big PTC World event is in June. There will be face-to-face technical committee meetings at that time as well. So, today's presentation is Why XML, Why Now, Why DITA by Julio Vasquez. Julio is an information architect at SDI. He's a key principal who has designed and implemented publication solutions for various customers. He uses his knowledge of technical communications, information architecture, previous publication experience, and investigatory skills to determine information solutions that best fit a client's needs. In his previous career with IBM, he was on the corporate team that defined DITA and wrote the first article on the language in April 2002. He's presented at STC Carolina, DITA East, Doctrine West, and DITA North America. His first book, DITA, on DITA, Practical DITA, presents an approach to understanding how to write using DITA from the ground up. He's also published a paper about indexing in the CIDM Best Practices newsletter. He's a contributor to the Yahoo DITA Users Group, a founder of the RTP DITA User Group, and a staunch DITA advocate. Welcome, Julio. I will turn the presentation over to you. Julio, it should be all yours.
Okay, waiting for
and here we
good
go.
webinar to tell me that I've got control. There it is. Show my screen. Well, good morning, everybody. That was impressive. What an introduction. First of all, I want to make one point before we begin. This is the correct spelling of my name, and the reason I insist on that is because
I'm
that's
so
the name
sorry.
it's okay. That's the name my father had, and I'm very proud of him. Because if it wasn't for him and what I learned from him, I wouldn't be here today speaking with all of you. And yes, I am with SDI Global Solutions. This is not necessarily a pitch for their services, but keep us in mind if you have needs. A little bit more about who I am. I am SDI Senior, one of SDI Senior Information Architects. As Liz said, the author of Practical DITA. I speak at DITA conferences. I was part of the original team that developed DITA. I am a DITA architect. I am the father of two, grandfather of one, and that's him in my arms right there. One of the things I learned just recently is that I've also wound up being recognized on an international scale. It turns out that the Japanese DITA consortium is going to use Practical DITA as the basis of their best practices, instructions, and guidelines for their writers, which kind of humbled me a little bit because I didn't think the book was all that great.
Oh, that's wonderful.
It's unbelievable. I just kind of fell off my chair when I read that email. But anyway, here we go. Let's start out with a little bit of history, and I know of this history mainly because of my father. He was a printer. In fact, he was a linotype operator. So I know quite a bit about the traditional publishing model because he used to take me to work every so often. And you had text and images, and you put them on the pages manually. And when I say manually, they were lead slugs with type on them and blank lead slugs for leading. All right. The fonts were handled by making changes in the linotype machine. All right. The images were handled as actual wooden blocks. In fact, I wish I still had this. My parents' wedding picture was a wooden block that was used in the newspaper. All right, so you visually and manually manage your page breaks, your layouts, all that stuff. Then came desktop publishing. And interesting story there is that when the newspapers Printers Union was approached by the newspapers and said, we are going to computerize page layout setups, and we want your union to learn it, the union refused. And the newspapers gave them one last chance and said, either you learn how to do this or we will have secretaries doing it. Again, they refused, and shortly thereafter, 50% of their membership was out of work. All right, so desktop publishing was a revolution, and you could define your page formats, and fonts you're using, flow your text any way you wanted to, electronically manage page breaks. But when you think of this model, in both cases, what you were looking at was one huge entity. All right, whether it be a newspaper or a book, the document was one piece.
Right.
Along came markup, and that changed things. Markup defined chunks that let you define what your content was in terms of the page layout. You know, you had paragraphs, you had lists, but you also had controls to break the pages where you wanted to. You still spent time fiddling with how things looked. And because you spent that time worrying about things like the layout, you kind of didn't have as much time to worry about little things like accuracy. So you know, things were better, but they weren't perfect. All right. Finding information in this mass, because you're still looking at still a unit that was a book or a document and nothing smaller, you're still searching for stuff on word basis. Okay. When the web came along, you had a page that didn't have an end. How many folks, and this is a rhetorical question because you can't really just answer me directly, but how many people remember at the beginning of the web when you would page through an article and it went on and on and on and on, and you said, where does it end? Well, you really didn't know. All right. Today, there are terabytes of content that are being created daily. I don't know how many folks know lulu.com, but they are publishing on the order of 1,500 books a day. Okay, that's a lot of information.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing, but it is definitely a hard number. 1,500 a day, and actually that number is increasing every month as the company gets more and more exposure. So you have a lot of information, and it's still bound by that boundary of the document, whether it be an article, a page, you know. So it's tough to find stuff. So why XML? Well, XML brings forth the idea that the content is the king. All right, your information exists about the context of the content if you so include. That's metadata, right? You define the content, but you don't worry about what it looks like. All right. You can add enough information so that you can do things like search for every article that tells me about the print command. So it's a lot easier to filter through those terabytes of data rather than typing in the keyword print. Guess how many hits you get on that?
Oh, I don't think I even could.
Yeah, you don't want to. You don't even want to think about it, right? So the consumer of the information can actually filter the information to what they want to see, because you have enough richness around the content to allow you to do that kind of thing, and that's even beyond what indexing would do in books. Because I don't know about the rest of you folks, but I actually hate indexing, even though I've written papers on it. One of the problems with indexing is you have to try to put yourself in someone else's mindset.
Right.
That's not easy. However, I can talk in terms of products and versions and releases and those kind of things to help somebody find information. Okay. The presentation of the content becomes a secondary issue at this point. That's handled by someone else. In fact, when I started in this business, even though I was still responsible for the presentation, there was someone who came after me to make sure everything broke nicely and stuff like that, and then they would tell me, oh, this isn't breaking right, go fix it. Kind of felt dumb to me. I said, well, you saw it, why can't you fix it? All right. But someone else controls what it looks like, what fonts are going to be used. You know, are there flowers around the page if you want? That's all handled during the build process. All right. So, you know, the markup can drive the presentation of the content, but as a creator, I don't worry about that presentation. What am I focused on now? What am I looking at? I'm looking at the accuracy of the content, the completeness, the conciseness. Okay. The other thing that happens is now I have these little pieces, these Lego blocks, if you will, and in fact there was a video that was just posted, I think, on the DITA awareness group in LinkedIn by someone, I think he was Dutch, who actually explained DITA in terms of Lego blocks.
I saw that just this week.
Yeah, wasn't that fun?
And it was a great example.
It's a great example. It's, you know, it was a little too basic maybe, but it gets the idea across, especially the idea of reuse, because you can take information in different documents, you can keep it current, but you can reuse it in other contexts if you need to. And in fact, some of the things going on with the, and I call DITA a dialect, if you will, things that are going on with the dialect now make it even easier to put content into different contexts, yet have it be relevant to that context. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Well, why do you want to look at XML now and DITA now? Well, the simple fact is you can't keep up with the information anymore. And the reality is that all the content that's being created out there, not all of it is completely unique. In fact, my basic feel is that at least 60% of the content that exists that wasn't created by a single person, all right, in terms of corporate information, which is, I mean, information is an asset when it comes to a company. It's a product asset. 60%, at least 60% of that can actually be reused in different contexts. So you can reassemble those pieces. But the other thing you don't want to happen is you don't want to duplicate that content. You want to make it a single source for other contexts, and you don't want to increase the resources that you're using to create all these terabytes of data. All right. And the reality is, if you look at how people consume information now, they do a lot of filtering and searching to find their information. For example, if you go to Amazon.com or Walmart.com, those kind of large sites, when you look for an item, you may put in a keyword to start with, let's say printers, all right? And they'll throw 300 results at you. But then they'll give you a list on the side that says, okay, between $0 and $100, between $100 and $200, between $200 and $300. So you can now filter that result to give you precisely what you're looking for. That's why it's important. You want to have enough richness in the content so you can do that kind of filtering on a daily basis. So that's key to how people use information now. We did a webinar a few weeks ago. We called it "Why Your Information Isn't Getting to Your Customers and What You Can Do About It." And one of our first points was people don't read anymore. They don't. They search. All right. They try to find exactly what they're looking for in the context and the environment that they're searching in. So you need to create information that fits that model. The only time you should think in terms of writing a document from beginning to end is fiction, or maybe even nonfiction when you talk about autobiographies, but I would even argue when you're writing an autobiography or a history or something like that, you can still write in smaller pieces and then assemble them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And in fact, Elliot Kimber is in the midst of a project now he calls DITA for Publishers. And his thrust there is to be able to allow you to assemble things to meet a traditional publishing model, but still be authoring in a output neutral way.
Interesting.
Yeah. The other reason, the traditional display vehicles are not necessarily going to be used for consumption of the same content. You have the iPhone, you have the Droid, all these devices, which we thought about 15, 20 years ago are now becoming more and more prevalent. So what's going to be this, the delivery vehicle, you can't anticipate anymore.
Right.
So you need a way to encapsulate the information so when it gets to those devices, the device can make up the decision of how to display it because it knows what it looks like, right? I mean, I don't know which smartphone a piece of content will wind up in. I shouldn't have to worry about that. And in fact, in the best of all worlds, a consumer could be sitting on their phone saying, I want this information, and that query goes to a database. It gets extracted out of that database, and the phone decides how to display it, or the device decides how to display it. Okay. I think Isaac Asimov had nightmares about this kind of thing. All right. People are really more concerned about the currency and the accuracy of information. And in fact, they'll forgive things like spelling errors as long as the error does not make them make a mistake. Okay. I have started to lose confidence a little bit in some of the traditional publishers because I've seen some horrendous stuff in traditional publishing output. I've seen books with a lot of editorial mistakes, and sometimes it makes it hard for me to read. And with fiction, that becomes really frustrating. With technical documentation, it becomes more than frustrating. It becomes an annoyance, and it could be an inhibitor to success. So you don't really want to spend your time worrying about anything other than becoming more accurate and making sure that the information that's available is the most current. You should be able to fix an error basically on the fly because that's become the expectation. The other thing is business is looking to do more with less. We know this. We've seen this coming for a long time. They want you to create this amazing amount of content and not increase your head count at all.
Right.
True?
Or almost the reverse, or even
almost reverse.
to reduce your,
yeah, to reduce your resource. You can't do that in a traditional model. It just doesn't make sense because you're too worried about content that has no relevance. I have a term that I call blue content. That's the stuff we used to use to transition from one topic to another in a book.
Right.
All right. That stuff should be gone by now because it doesn't really add to the accuracy or the quality of the document. And the reality is people are not reading, they haven't read stuff from front to back in years. I used to tell some technical writers that they were fooling themselves if they actually thought people cared about that content that had nothing to do with how to do something. Because the reality is they didn't care. All right, show me how to insert Part A into Part B. Don't tell me what Part A is made of. So that's been the key. Excuse me, I'm going to take a sip of water.
Okay.
Have there been any questions so far?
One question was whether or not they could have a copy of the presentation, but I let them know we are recording this for later, and I have a hand up right now, so let me unmute Dupinder. Oh, let's see, hang on. There we go. Dupinder? Oh, hang on. Technically challenged here with the controls. Dupinder? No. For some reason. There we go. Dupinder? Dupinder, did you have a question? Okay, well, I'll go ahead and mute again. Sorry, that's it. No questions at the time.
Okay. I also took the time to check the time. Okay, why DITA? Well, why do you want to use this particular standard? Well, the first reason, of course, is it is a standard and it's growing in the technical communications community, and there are a number of major companies and that are using the standard, and that number is growing daily. It's supported by a number of major vendors, and the TechCom folks who are most interested, and there are technical committees forming that are building specializations for other fields than the original field that it was targeted to. This absolutely floors me. It amazes me, because it's actually more of a wildfire that's starting with DITA. There are pharmaceutical firms starting to look at it seriously and trying to figure out how to take their model and make it fit. Of course, we had the mechanical industry supply specializations, and that'll be available in the 1. Well, it is available now in the 1.2 specification. Learning and training has grown. And in fact, I'm also in touch with Sean Healy, who has developed a way to embed video, or at least invoke video from a topic that was created with DITA. So
Very cool.
Very cool, extremely cool. And in fact, I got an email late yesterday from him. And of course, I was brain dead at the time. And he said, "Hey, I found an easier way to do this. Will you check it out for me?" And I said, "Okay, it'll wait till next week, Sean, because I just can't handle it today." But and I met him last year at I think it was out in Palm Springs. I met him, and we chatted about his ideas and his stuff. And I thought it was cool back then, and he's found a simpler way, which is even more cool.
Amazing.
Excuse me, I have a question
Yes.
from the audience.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
If currently creating in Word and PowerPoint, how do you determine relevance of XML data, and where do you start?
Okay, that's a good question. If currently creating Word and PowerPoint. PowerPoint is problematic, so I'm going to hit that second. All right. In terms of Word, again, keep in mind that you're still locked into a structure that's got very little information about itself, and its final product is always going to be a document. And Word was designed for a medium to small document. I won't say large, because it's always run into problems when it does something very big. The question you have to ask yourself is, you have to look across your documentation and say, am I saying the same thing or similar things in multiple places? And if I am, what's keeping that information in sync? And if my answer to that question is, well, processes and communications, how good are those processes and communications? And if the answer to that question is, well, it's not as good as it could be, then you want to start thinking, maybe the better idea, especially if my business depends on it and my customer satisfaction depends on that information, maybe I want to consider at least XML. Definitely DITA. And the reason I'm pushing DITA is because there's a lot of stuff that DITA does for you, especially, and this is interesting because one of the things that happened is IBM put out a reference implementation of the specification, and the vendors are using it as the basis for their solutions. So there are demands being made on something that was never intended to be a production system. And they're meeting a lot of it, which is just very impressive. And then there are folks coming along and they're writing plugins to extend that even further. So, you know, besides the power that's built into DITA to begin with, I end up with more power being added to it from other volunteers, basically. So there's a lot of leverage you get for I won't say no cost. I won't ever say free because it does cost. All right. Now going back to the PowerPoint part of it, PowerPoint is again, people tend to use PowerPoint to do things like I'm doing right now, presentations. And the question becomes, well, is that presentation based on some other source? And if it is, again, how do you keep it current and accurate going forward as things develop? You can still source something, not exactly PowerPoint, but you can use like HTML slidey to create presentations, all right, based on HTML that's being generated from DITA. It's just a matter of figuring out how precisely to do that. And I'm not going to go into that because that's a fairly technical discussion. And probably something I haven't looked at in a long time, so I'd be talking from memory, and that would not be a good thing. Because my memory sometimes goes to other places. Does that answer the question?
Yes, I have another question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Can we insert 3D models in the highly compressed and optimized formats like Acrobat, 3D, U3D, DWF, etc.?
Okay. There is a structure within DITA called an object, and very basically you have to instruct the processing that handles the source on how to handle the objects. So you need to basically classify the objects one way or the other and tell it, let's say, what program to execute to display the model. So the capability is there, all right? And one of the things, and believe me, I was not the smartest bulb in this lamp when we developed the standard. But one of the things we tried to do is try to make it so that there were capabilities within this particular XML dialect such that folks had a way to leverage the language to do other things that we didn't anticipate at the time. So the long answer, of course, the short answer is yes, you can. The long answer is I can't tell you how to do that because I have not tried it, I have not done it myself, but it is feasible, and the specification sort of gives you hints on how to make that happen.
All right.
Anything else?
No more questions at this time.
Okay. And I have no clue where I am in this presentation right now. Okay. And I talked about this briefly on the other slide. The reference implementation does a lot of heavy lifting that you would have to implement yourself if you used your own custom XML. Okay. That's something that is so beneficial. It's because a lot of stuff, especially if you start specializing on some of the elements, you can just use the default processing to drive the outputs. That is just so great, and I'm using it today. I mean, I play around with this sometimes and do my own little specializations and see what I get on the output end, and then I can even write some XSL transforms to make changes to what I'm getting out of that. So it's really kind of cool to see that there is a body of programming already there that helps you get from point A, which is the content creation, to point B, which is the content consumption, right? There are component CMSs out there that understand DITA. They don't thwart DITA's reuse mechanism. They leverage that reuse mechanism, and I'm going to not mention those CMSs. That's for you to find out, because the problem here is I am a consultant, so if I say anything, it sounds like I'm trying to push one product over the other, and I don't want to do that. Okay. And the other thing is that there are enough people who have already been trained in DITA that know it fairly well, if not very well, that you can get resource without having to spend a lot more money to train folks. And if you have your own custom XML, when you get a technical writer, then you got to train them in how to do things your way. And again, DITA is now being used internationally. All right, I find that awesome. This is far beyond what I think any of us ever expected back in 1999, 2000, when we were first starting to hash this out. And I'll tell you an interesting story. At least it's interesting to me. When we started building this dialect, we had come from this big SGML monster, and one of the things that people were really, really screaming about in IBM was the number of elements that we had to learn to put together our content into books. So when I joined the committee, the first thing I said was, you know, I think you're right. We do need something better than what we got, and I agree that this is a good thing to do, but I tell you that I'm going to challenge you to come out and do this in less than 150 elements. When DITA 1.0 was released, the base language had less than 120 elements. In fact, I think it was closer to 100. And I considered that a personal win, mainly because I wanted to keep things easy for the person who was creating content. I thought that was extremely important. Now, of course, when you start looking at attributes and all that, and all the metadata and stuff like that, then you start getting overwhelmed. So, you know, there's a yin and yang. For every strength there is a weakness. For every weakness there's a strength.
Right.
And that's all I have. Wow. So, you know, the bottom line is, if you are considering moving from your current document creation model, if you're moving away from Word or FrameMaker, and by FrameMaker I mean unstructured frame, you know, you want to consider going to XML, and even better, you want to consider going to DITA, because it's going to probably give you the most bang for your buck, because you won't have as much of an expense training folks. You'll be able to pick up folks fairly easily, especially, you know, that downturn we had a few months back. Well, a few people wound up unemployed that probably shouldn't have been, and those folks know this dialect, and they understand things like information architecture and structured authoring and things of that nature. And so they'll be able to ramp up quickly and help you succeed. You know, and again, the other thing is, and I didn't mention this during the presentation, if your company is in a growth curve where it's starting to acquire other companies or partner with other companies, rather than having all these XML dialects to try to get to agree, you have common currency in dialect by moving to DITA. All right, so you can make the transition from one company to another easier for everyone involved, especially when it comes to their content creation. There are a lot of pluses, and you know there are probably minuses, but you know what? I don't worry about those minuses so much because I've been able to overcome them on my own in certain cases. For those who have never seen my book, I actually took Practical DITA and created it with DITA using the DITA Open Toolkit. And while it's not the prettiest thing on the block, it did win an award from the Carolina chapters of the STC. Okay, and it's still readable. At least I think it's readable.
Absolutely.
So I have a couple questions from the audience. So the first question is what, in your opinion, is the best tool to create DTD or schema files?
You know, I'm going to not answer that question. And again, the reason I'm not going to answer that question is because it'll sound like I'm making a recommendation of one product over another product. They all have their pluses and their minuses, and I have my own personal favorite. And you know, when it comes to a best tool, it really depends on what you need. And I wouldn't think just in terms of content creation, in terms of XML, you know, schemas and DTDs and things of that nature. I would also think in terms of, okay, am I going to be using a CMS? How does it connect with the CMS products that I'm considering? How does it fit into my overall process? Okay, and I can't answer that question for you because I don't know it. I don't know your processes. Only you know your processes. So the answer to that is there are a bunch of them out there, you know, and I'll name them. That much I'll do. I'll name them. You know, you have Arbortext editor. You have XML. You have Oxygen. You have XML Mind. Let's see. You have Syntax Cerna. Did I leave any out?
Not that I can think of offhand.
Yeah. So, and they all, you know, I've tried all of them, I think. The exception would be XML Mind. Okay, I've tried all except XML Mind, and they all have strengths and they all have weaknesses, and I've used them all, and you know, I don't want to recommend any of them because my company has partnerships with a couple of them, and again, I don't want to bias anyone because you really need to understand what it is you're doing to move forward.
Great.
I will also say this, all of them have evaluation versions.
Okay, I have another question for you. Actually, I have a couple of them. So the next person would like you to talk about how an enterprise that has deployed XML and content management using a handful of custom DocBook-based DTDs should evaluate and measure the potential return of adding or converting to a DITA implementation.
Okay. Can you repeat that one more time? Because I thought I heard DocBook, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, he put in parentheses DocBook-based. So can you talk about how an enterprise that has deployed XML and content management using a handful of custom in parentheses, DocBook-based, DTDs, should evaluate, measure the potential return of adding or converting to DITA implementation.
Okay. And again, I will talk to it in terms of DocBook as its purpose in life, okay? Because DocBook is designed basically for books, articles, papers, things of that nature. So it is really looking at the monolith structure. It does have ways to promote reuse, okay? The benefit would depend on, again, how much reuse you really need and how much you need to leverage. You know, I have taken companies from unstructured frame to DocBook because some of the documentation was in DocBook, keeping in mind that we're probably going to evolve even further and pull them into DITA because of the power that's built into DITA for reuse. So if you need to leverage a lot of reuse, the return on investment is going to be great. I saw a presentation, and I'm coming from memory again, that that was given by one company that when they converted to DITA, they wound up being to produce the same number of pages, all right, and they use pages specifically as their measurement, the same number of pages with 30% less source content when they went to DITA.
Huh.
So, you know, that's a compelling return on investment there. And they did it through reuse, and they did it through minimalism, and they did it through rewriting some stuff too. The danger, I shouldn't say the danger, but you know, in DocBook, again, you start thinking in terms of creating a single document, and so you wind up with some glue stuff. And there's nothing wrong with DocBook. I mean, it creates some great stuff. It's a more mature standard than DITA is, so there's more support for it out there. All right, so it's got some pluses there. But if you really have need reuse, if you need to move quickly, and especially if you're creating products that are developed in an agile environment, you may want to consider the modularity that DITA brings to the table, because now you're going to be looking at creating content on smaller bases, even reviewing that content on a smaller base, which could help you get to market quicker. All right. Now, if you got stuff in DocBook or something that's based on DocBook, hopefully the changes to DocBook were not done outside of an extensibility methodology. And I don't know if DocBook has the ability to extend that way. But it's a relatively simple, well, it's an exercise at least. I don't know how simple it is because I haven't done it myself yet, but I'm looking at doing it. To take DocBook, which is XML anyway, and create a transform from DocBook to DITA if you need to do that. However, you need to be able to supply information in the DocBook structures that will help your transform make decisions in terms of the paradigm that DITA espouses, which is your topics are typed. They're classified in terms of whether they're concepts or references or tasks. So you have to take each section and identify that level of metadata, so to speak, so that your transform can go through your code and say, okay, I need to do this with this, so you have at least a rough form. Okay, will it be perfect? No, I don't know any conversion from any source to any target that is ever clean on the first shot. You have to go ahead and say to yourself, I'm making an investment in the future. So the cost, I've got to bear the cost, and I will move forward with it. That probably didn't answer the question at all, did it?
Actually, I believe it did. And I'll give him a chance to respond back if it didn't. I have another question for you. Have you heard of CAM, Content Assembly Mechanism? If so, what do you think of its future and value when applied to DITA?
I honestly have not heard of CAM, and if the person who asked me that question would send me a link to information about it, I would turn around and do some research because one of my basic positions right now is that the DITA Open Toolkit does need something to replace it. And that's not saying that it's not doing a good job, but there's got to be an easier way than the way we're doing things today. And if it exists out there, I'll be the first person to try to push it up the flagpole. And I would thank that person if they do send that new information my way.
Okay. They did send a link, and I will make sure that I send it to you. You said CAM is an alternative to XSD, and I have a link for you. So I'll make sure I forward that.
All right. Thank you.
I have another question for you. In your experience, do you see medium-sized businesses adopting DITA?
I actually had a relatively small company, a small software company, and I actually wrote a white paper about the experience, approach us to convert their stuff to DITA. And it was probably the worst scenario ever because they didn't even have their content source. So we basically had to go through their content and recreate the source as part of the project. And they had a very limited budget, and we wound up having to force everything into that limited budget. Yes, in fact, you know, I don't know how you define medium, but it's possible for small companies to use DITA because the cost of entry is relatively low. I mean, because it's an ASCII-based environment, if you knew what you were doing, you could probably create this stuff with Notepad. Do I advise that? Absolutely not, because I can't keep the structures in my mind, and I helped build this thing. I never recommend to someone to go into this environment and not use a parsing editor, all right? Because then you don't have to remember all the XML rules and the DITA rules and all that stuff. At least the editor helps you helps keep you from messing it up. And believe me, when I open files in WordPad, I make sure that after I finish, I go into a parsing editor to get some validation, because I believe that 70 to 80% of the time I muck it up.
Yeah, same here. It's very easy to make a mistake and stop processing somewhere along the line.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have one more person who's asking about DITA references books.
DITA references books. Believe it or not, there are more today than there were 2 years ago. And I can name them off the top of my head. There is an introduction to DITA that was written by Jennifer Linton, but it's relatively dated. It has not been, I don't think it's been updated for the 1.2 standard yet. and I don't know what the plans are for that. And that's available through CIDM. There is DITA 101, written by Anne Rockley, and that is about that's a real soup to nuts kind of thing. If you want to know how to do structured offering, and you want to know DITA, and you want to know how to process DITA, all those things, that's probably that's a good book. And then of course there's my book, Practical DITA, which is I do not do soup to nuts, and I did that intentionally because I didn't want to intimidate someone just coming into this. I don't talk about how to process, so I don't talk about the open toolkit at all, or I actually very rarely. I mention it where I feel it's important, but I don't tell you how to invoke it. I don't have a compendium of the language, so you will not find a reference section with all the elements. You will find the elements that I feel are important to write, and that's it. There was 1 or 2 deviations from that. But and I have a lot of examples now, but my feeling is that if you want to know every element in the language, that's what the language reference online is for. And I didn't feel that I would do things justice by trying to replicate that, especially since I don't have the source to that, and it would be, and I can't point to where that content's being stored. So it would go out of, it could be inaccurate or go out of date relatively quickly, and I preferred not to do that. Anne Rockley's book is available through Amazon and lulu.com, I believe. My book is available from Amazon and lulu.com. If you look for Practical DITA on Amazon, make sure that you are looking at the October 2009 edition and not the March 2009 edition, because the October 2009 edition has the 1.2 features in it. I am trying to get Amazon to get the first edition off, but that takes time.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, one more question. Sorry. I seem to have had a glitch that happened with the web session. Hopefully everybody is still there. I had one of the people ask about a white paper that you mentioned, and if you had a link to that. And it was about the medium-sized businesses adopting DITA.
If you go to sdicorp.com, there is a resources link, and that resources link is broken down into presentations and white papers and webinars, I believe, webinar recordings. Mm-hmm. So you can find it there relatively easily. Mm-hmm. There's also a blog that I and Larry Kunz contribute to a lot of content to when we have time. Mm-hmm. So you can see some of our views of life, and especially when it comes to technical communications. So again, www.sdicorp.com, and go under resources and look for the white papers. And I believe my indexing white paper is up there too.
Okay. Great. I believe we've hit all the questions. Are there any other questions at this time? Please go ahead and feel free to type those in the question box.
And while they're doing that, I'll have another sip of water.
There you go. For the question about CAM, Julio, that
Mm-hmm.
He's talking about the content assembly mechanism from Oasis. It's mostly, as far as I know, it's about transaction instances, and a runtime, which would, I mean, I could see you'd send a DITA document to CAM for processing, but they're not really in the same sort of scope and aimed at the same target. Sort of they don't really play in the same space as far as I can tell.
Okay. I mean, it would be interesting to see if you could use CAM to process DITA and create an output.
I'm sure you could. Yeah.
Yeah, you might be able to. You might not. It depends on how much work you have to do to make that happen. Because again, you know, it's the temptation, and all the vendors have done it so far, is let's package the open toolkit, and we'll, you know, whenever someone wants to go to output, we'll just make the call to the open toolkit, and it works.
Not
nicely.
all the vendors.
Not all the vendors. Okay, I won't speak to the vendor that doesn't then. Okay.
But and it really depends on what you're trying to get out, I think.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, the you know, when it comes to previewing content, using the open toolkit is phenomenal. Okay. I will tell you that I know for sure that IBM uses the open toolkit under its covers for its processing to a point. And then at a certain point, it deviates from the open toolkit.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of that code that's in the open toolkit is basically what's driving IBM's content production right now. And believe it or not, there's only one programmer working on that.
I believe it.
Okay, I have no more questions from the audience.
Well, I want to thank Liz for inviting me to do this. This is actually kind of fun, even though I couldn't see anybody. And hopefully any of you who come to DITA North America, you know, if you see me wandering in the halls, feel free to come up and introduce yourself.
Absolutely.
I don't bite.
No, it's our pleasure to have you, and I'm so glad you could do such a great presentation today. And all kinds of good questions from the audience tells us that it's definitely a great presentation.
Comment from the audience thanking Julio and telling me that Julio is awesome.
Wow. Thank you. Really, I am impressed that people think I know that much.
That's great. Thank you so much. So to remind everyone, our next meeting will be April 24th. It's the fourth Saturday of the month, and our announcement for that should be coming out this week. It'll go out to all the regular places that were mentioned on that other slide, and through PTC's news as well. Thank you, Julio, for getting up and being out late in the day for you, middle of the day, and everyone else who got up early. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.